In one of the parables that Jesus told, he said that the harvest is the end of the world. And so people are looking and thinking about the end of the world. When will the earth make its last gasp? Many believe it will be caused by the effects of global warming. I've heard that. Have you? Oceans rise and cities underwater. Not long ago, there was an ice age. Much of the northern hemisphere was covered with ice. Providentially for us, there was global warming came along so we could grow gardens in the northern hemisphere, right? Some think it will be nuclear war. Every leader will push the button at the same time. And global annihilation. People talk about that. Or could it be that it will end with pollution? And all the plants die and humans can't breathe oxygen anymore. Doomsday is in the back of many minds. Eclipsed only by the trouble and the energy needed to raise a family and make a living. Or one of these great rocks called a meteor comes out of the sky and lands in the ocean and causes tidal waves that reach all the way to Kansas City. You know, Time Life Books has had a book about that, big story about meteors. Or flying saucers. Or drones. Has anybody heard of drones lately? Drones. From unknown sources. You know, if I didn't know Jesus, I'd be flat on my back with sheer terror because of the foreign invaders from space. You know, really, literally. I don't know how people survive without Jesus. I really don't. The Bible says the earth was destroyed as much as it possibly could be at one time. The great flood of Noah. Genesis 6, verses 1 to 4. I'd like to have you follow along with me. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. There came a time when the sins of the world got so bad that mankind was in the throes of annihilation themselves. They would have killed one another if he hadn't come along and saved the human family. Chapter 6, verses 1 to 4. It came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all that they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with men, for that he also is flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. There were giants in the earth in those days, also after that, when the sons of men came to the daughters of men, and they bore children to them, the same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. Sons of God, daughters of men. Now these are not angels mating with the daughters of men. Now, there is a paraphrase that talks about that, but that's not true. That's not even good science. These are lineages of people, the human family developing as the earth was still new. That's a foolish idea to think about the angels coming and procreating with people. That's not a Bible doctrine. I hear that every once in a while. Our lineage was outside of the Lord's blessing, and there was great rebellion. And two groups intermarried very early in the history of the world. Now verse 5. And in the days that Adam lived, You know, I read from the wrong chapter here. No, I didn't. Verse 5. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. But a time came when the thoughts were evil continually. You know, if you're thinking about it, you're doing it. Thoughts are very important from a biblical perspective. Jesus made plain in the Sermon on the Mount that the thoughts lead to acts, and acts lead to habits, and habits lead to addictions. The whole world is quickly coming to that kind of a time again. The first destruction of the earth was for moral reasons. God had to clean the house, and he did, else the race would have long become extinct. And he had to start with his faithful servant Noah. Matthew 24 says, like the days in the time of Noah, the earth will be morally corrupt and again will be tending toward death. Only evil things will be thought about. Matthew 24 now. Matthew chapter 24. This is the great chapter where Jesus talks about the signs that would precede his coming. By the way, we had a Sabbath school class over in the BLC this morning. We talked about this subject. I was amazed at that. Matthew chapter 24, verses 2 and 3. You know that there are 3 chapters in the Bible, actually 4 chapters in the Bible that are Matthew 24s, talking about the signs of Christ's coming. Matthew 24 is one of them. Luke chapter 17, Luke chapter 21, and Mark chapter 13. Now, John doesn't have one like that. That's the book of Revelation. It's John's Matthew 24. And so let's look at Matthew 24, verses 2 and 3. And Jesus said to them, see not all these things? Verily, I say to you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of your coming and the end of the world? Jesus gave them a real story of woe. And notice what he says next. The first words out of his mouth, and Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no man deceives you. Jesus warns of great deceptions, deceivers, liars who do not teach from the Bible in the end time. And maybe even aliens in human flesh, who knows? Perhaps evil angels posing as men. I've read about that. Maybe messages masquerading as dead relatives. Maybe people claiming to be Christ himself. The Bible warns about that. Matthew 24, now verse 6. And it says, you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. All these things must come to pass. But what does it say next? The end is not yet. All through history there have been wars and rumors of wars. These things are with us always, still with us, have been, but the end is not yet. Then verse 7, it says, for nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. Famines and earthquakes, we've all seen those and heard about them. Maybe some of us have experienced those in California. Verse 8 says that these are only the beginnings of sorrows. We've always had these things with us. These will always be there, he said. They're all signs of the delay and the gross wickedness of man in the earth. General signs. But it says that the end is not yet. These signs are there for us to know, yes, soon Jesus is coming, but not yet. So hatred of the nations for one another and wars and persecution. Have you heard about that lately in the news? Persecutions. Love of many will grow cold. I read someplace that there will be accidents and catastrophes by land and by sea. I heard just last night that that airliner over there in Korea, South Korea, there were some of our own people in that plane. This comes pretty close to home, doesn't it? The love for many will grow cold, verse 12. Martyrdoms, verse 9. Increase in wickedness. Every generation has seen all of these woes, and especially the first century church saw it, because they were looking forward to a type of destruction that would happen in the destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem was just ahead of them. And it's interesting that in Matthew 24, it's difficult to tell whether he's talking about the events that preceded the destruction of Jerusalem or the signs of the end of the world when Jesus would finally come. But you might say, you're taking away my list. I've been counting on all these things. Jesus is coming soon, isn't he? But they've always been there. They were there before the destruction of Jerusalem, even in the first century. Now of Matthew 24, verse 13, it says, but he that shall endure, what does it say? To the end shall be saved. Matthew talks about that twice for emphasis. He that endures to the end shall be saved. Here's a sort of the end of a section of Matthew 24, right here in verse 13. Sort of the end of a section. After talking about wars and rumors of wars and famines and pestilences, now, verse 13, a sort of an end of a section. A warning to those who live in the end. I like that. There's an error. There is an end point to all of this. But don't go to sleep when you see all this trouble. We're in a new year. Year in and year out, we see signs that the Lord will come. We've all seen them. Don't put your hope that when you see all these things, the end is here. Don't do that. Then Jesus goes back to heaven. Pentecost comes. Acts chapter 2. And the church added numbers, great numbers, daily. 3,000 baptized on the first day of Pentecost. And then the 30s and the 40s of the first century and the 50s. First century here now. The Christians were centered in Jerusalem. They were a growing church. But in Matthew 24, Jesus warns them of the impending destruction of Jerusalem. And during those years, they saw poverty. The church was very poor. The members were discriminated against because of persecution. There was war. There was earthquake. There were martyrs right there in the first century. Many turning from the faith. Increase in wickedness. And what if during the 40s and 50s and 60s, every time they saw a false Christ, they ran out of Jerusalem? What if they did that? Every time they saw a false Christ or war someplace, they ran out of Jerusalem. Running ahead of time, right? Everything we see or hear of war, we sell out and we head for the hills, right? We don't do that. I've known people to do that. Years ago in Idaho, I know of a family, a little family. They believed that there were some things happening in the world, and they headed for the hills. They were there for about 2 years, and then they came back again. Jesus said, the end is not yet. Then verses 14 and 15. Now we have a new section in Matthew 24. Verses 14 and 15. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and what? Then shall the end come. And when you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso reads, let him understand. And then Jesus gets very specific and very definitive. The scene changes in verse 14. He doesn't say anymore, the end is not yet. When you see the gospel going to all the world, then know what? The end has come. Matthew 24, 14 to 22. Remember, this is a new section now in Matthew 24, verse 14. Again, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. When you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee to the mountains. that him that is on the housetop come not down or take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to it for his clothes, to take his clothes. And woe to them that are with child, and them that give suck in those days. But pray you that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day, for then shall be great tribulation, which was not since the beginning of the world to that time, nor ever shall be. And except those days be shortened, there shall be no flesh saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. You see, it's very, very difficult to tell what he's talking about, the destruction of Jerusalem or the time just before his coming. But it's very definitive. He's defining something important when you see this. He says, when you see this, then it's time to get out. Earthquakes, famine, wars, these are not definitive. We've seen a lot of this. Then what should we be looking for? There are important things. Let's take a little deep breath before we go on, because Matthew 24 has some very definitive things. John 14, 1-3, we all know that one. Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go and prepare a place for you, that where I am, there ye may be also. Do we believe that? If he can create a world by the word of his mouth, then he can prepare many mansions for us, right? You know, some of those may be very high-rise. I think if the holy city is going to be as high as it is wide and long, then there may be some pretty tall buildings there, right? I read one time that on Oahu, in Honolulu, over half the population lives above the 20th floor of that city. It's an amazing thing. You can have mansions that go up into the sky. You know, humans have a great capacity to imagine things. Imagine with me what that might be like. One translation says, in my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. So he does greater miracles than that every day when he makes new creatures out of us. When he deals with us and he gives us a new birth, he is doing a miracle probably greater than these miracles we're talking about, because he can just speak with that. But with us, he has to work, right? He works tirelessly with us every day, speaking to our hearts through his Holy Spirit. So he's not only building mansions in the sky, but he's also building a house in our hearts where he wants to dwell, where he wants to live. It's not only about us having mansions in the sky and on a planet out there called heaven, someplace in the universe, but he longs for a dwelling place too. Oh, how he loves you and me. He stands at our heart's door and knocks every day, creating within us a desire to know him and to love him like he loves us. Verse 15 talks about the abomination of desolation. In 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about that, so I'm going to skip over that. But that's a definitive sign. There are definitive signs. I titled my sermon today, Definitive Signs of Christ's Coming. We're not talking about here about war and rumors of wars and earthquakes and famines. They've been with us ever since day one. History tells us that Cestius, a Roman general, surrounded Jerusalem and laid siege to that city about the year 67 AD. Then mysteriously, the desolating Roman armies left. And the Christians who trusted the word of Christ, they fled the city. There might have been only a short time. As Cestius left with his armies, the Jewish zealots, the warriors in Jerusalem, followed him right out the open gates. As they opened the gates, they followed them, and they slaughtered a lot of them. That's like poking a grizzly bear with a sharp stick, right? Because 3 years later, the armies of Rome came again and literally destroyed the city. And Jesus said, when you see this thing, this is something definitive now, he says. When you see this, don't even go to your room and get more clothes. Flee the city. And they did flee. They went to places to the east and to the north, like Antioch, the mountains of Syria also. And for the most part, they became dedicated missionaries to the places where they went, but they left the city. And we're to understand that not one Christian lost their lives because they were obedient to Christ's words. I want to emphasize the real definitive signs this morning. A short time later, 70 AD, the Roman armies, Titus came back, utterly destroyed the city. Not one Christian lost their lives. How come not one Christian lost their lives? They were given a definitive sign, and they knew this was the time. They weren't to run for the hills every time they saw an earthquake or a war. We've had those for all through the history. Not one Christian lost their lives. Take all the comfort you can out of that. God is with his people. God is reliable. He will not suffer in the end time any of us to be tempted above what we're able. I've heard people over the years say, well, I hope that he lays me to sleep before the great time of trouble comes. But God is not wasteful. He gives grace for the opportunity, for the event when it comes. If he gave us that kind of grace right now, we'd waste it. He's not wasteful. But when the time comes, every believer will have what he needs and will not be tempted above what they're able. Look forward to that time. Because when we do, we'll know that our redemption draweth near. The events about Jerusalem's destruction were a type of the end of the world. What happened will happen again, only this time on a worldwide scale. I have an idea that they saw signs in the heavens even. There were a lot of things beginning to happen. Jesus talked about them. And Matthew 24 is a dual prophecy. What happened will happen again. Jerusalem destroyed, second coming of Jesus. Signs preceding both events. Prophecy that it's difficult to tell when Jesus is talking about Jerusalem or the second coming. Very difficult in this chapter. Matthew 24:15 talks about the Roman armies, the abomination that makes desolation. The Roman army surrounded the city. They were standing where they ought not to stand. And that was a sign to them. So the great end time abomination of desolation hasn't come yet, but it will come. In fact, that event, when it does come, we will recognize that the end has come. I want to talk about that 2 weeks from today. It will not be the end is not yet. It will be very definitive. It's not like the famines and the wars and the persecutions. Those are general signs of the tearing time that we observe every day in the news. There are lots of signs in Matthew 24 that have to do with the end is not yet. These are general signs: war, famine, false Christ, and so forth. But there are 4 very definitive signs, and that's what I want to talk about this morning, that warn us that the end is here. Definitive signs. The first one is the abomination of desolation. Now, I don't want to spend any time on that this morning. We'll do that later. But the abomination that makes desolate, when you see this begin to happen, know that it's very, very close and at the door. Watch for it. It's an important one. It's like a desolating army around Jerusalem in 70 AD. Secondly, the second definitive one, we glossed over this one, not because it's not important, but it says when the gospel is preached in all the world, then what will happen? The end will come. I have to tell you, we don't know how far the gospel has gone. We have no idea. But I believe it's being preached in all the world. It's something we need to pay attention to. It's going by television, by electronic media. It's going by people who are carrying little iPods in some of the darkest parts of Africa where they don't even have a written language. It's going by Bibles, door to door, among the residences way up in the Arctic regions. We hear about some of those stories. We even hear about miraculous things happening, even a resurrection over in New Guinea. Things are happening. The gospel is going. He works miracles so people will what? Believe. When you see the gospel go to all the world, know this, that the end is near. Never in the history of the world has there been such a gospel proclamation as right now. Would you like to see Jesus come? And get on this celestial limousine? You know, Enoch went to heaven on a chariot of what? Chariot of fire. I don't know what form this is going to take. I don't think there's going to be people going up in the air with their arms flaying and their legs going back and forth. I think he's going to take us home in a very, very beautiful, wonderful way. I don't know what a chariot of fire is. I haven't seen that yet. But I think if we live till Jesus comes, we will see that. If we want to see this, we need to continue to understand our responsibility in the church. We have a mission. Not only have we a mission, but we have a commission. God is not preaching the gospel, generally speaking, with angels. Who is he using to carry the gospel to the world? We are the ones, 3 angels flying in the midst of heaven. What does it mean, 3 angels flying in the midst of heaven in Revelation 14? It means it's worldwide, right? You know, you can reach this planet, every part of the planet, with 3 satellites. Did you know that? 3 satellites. Draw a picture sometime and see the effect of each of those satellites. If they're put in the right spot, they can touch the whole globe. I heard that on 3ABN one time. Have you ever heard of 3 angel broadcasting? Now we're using a lot of satellites, more than just 3. This is why I believe that we need to be very, very serious about the idea that the gospel is going to all the world. That's what the purpose of the world, of the church is in these end times. The third one, definitive sign. What was the first one? Abomination of desolation, right? Whatever that is. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. The second one, the gospel going to all the world. Watch for it. If this is happening, we need to take it seriously. Jesus said, then when the end comes. The third one is not wars and rumors of wars. My, we have a lot of those going on. The planet's on fire. Not false Christs and famines and earthquakes. These are general signs. They will be there even to the end. But Matthew 24, 23 to 26. Let's look at it. Matthew 24, 23 to 26. It says, then, if any man say to you, lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. There are going to be miracles of an extraordinary nature just before Jesus comes. And when you see those, you'll know this is different. There's been a turn in the road. It says, there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great, what did I just say? Great signs and wonders, insomuch as were possible they should deceive the very elect. Behold, I have told you before. Wherefore, if they shall say to you, behold, he is in this desert, go not forth. Behold, he is in the secret chambers, believe it not. I haven't really seen anything that answers to that yet. And we haven't really seen the great miracles yet that are coming. But when they come, know that this is a part of the definitive signs that Jesus' coming is very, very soon. From verse 14 onward, definitive signs at that time. Jesus is saying here that there will be great deceivers. Christ is here. Go to the desert and see him. Miracles will be wrought. You know, when you see a miracle, you need to listen to the sermon that precedes that miracle. Do you hear what I said? If they speak not according to this word, it is because what? There's no light in them. Miracles are going to come, and they're going to be very deceptive ones, and they're going to be very definitive of the idea that Jesus is soon to come. Don't believe it. These miracles are not just ordinary miracles, but miracles that have great power to deceive. When you see them, you'll be able to identify with Revelation chapter 13 to 15. Even fire from heaven. When you see these kind of miracles all over the place, know that we're right there. There are going to be false revivals. What should we look for in a revival? The word means something, doesn't it? It means to be made alive. It's a revival. It's based on Bible truth where hearts are changed and new births are taking place and new converts are coming into the church in great numbers. Revelation 9, 1 and 2. I want us to look at this. I'm kind of winding down here, but Revelation chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. This is coming under the sixth trumpet. Revelation 9, verses 1 and 2. Actually, 1 to 4. This is actually the fifth angel. The fifth trumpet. And the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star fall from heaven to the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there rose smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. And the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth. To them was given power. Scorpions have the power. Scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, nor any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. Wow, this is an end-time text. Seal of God in the foreheads. There is going to be a time when the great pit is going to be opened up, and the demons are going to come out of the pit, and as far as God allows, there are going to be miracles that we've never seen before, just before Jesus comes. Chapters 8 and 9 talk about something that just precedes the second coming. God allows Satan to a little bit more rope, like he did in the days of Job. He lifted the barrier just a little bit. And Job, what happened to poor old Job? He was tormented like horrific. But he knew the heart of Job. He knew he could withstand it. He was not tempted above what he's able, right? Somebody told him, you ought to curse God and die. No. He knew the heart of Job. But the devil had access to him like he never had before. I suspect since the very beginning of time, the devil has been pretty much kept under wraps. He can't come to you and grab you by the throat at night, right? He's not allowed to do that. If he could, he would. He would. He would like to destroy every believer. But there's coming a time when the smoke will come out of the pit, and there will be a little bit more rope. And he can do things that he hasn't had a chance to do before. Now, should this strike fear in our lives? He has not given us the spirit of fear, but what? A sound mind. Read the Bible. Spend time with him every day. We need to spend time at the feet of Jesus every day, every morning, so that we know these things, so that when the time comes, we will be ready for it. These are miracles that are not just ordinary general miracles, but miracles that have the great power to deceive. The wonders of Satan will test everybody. These miracles will even bring Seventh-day Adventists to the test, even though we know better. If possible, it would deceive what? The very elect. We're talking about miracles here that have never been seen before. Well, there have always been some miracles. There have been deceivers out there. Earlier on in the chapter, he talks about false prophets and false Christs. But something different is coming. Even the very elect are in danger. And we'll need to have a strong connection with Jesus in the days ahead as we begin a new and uncertain year. The year before us is like a blank white piece of paper. It hasn't been written on yet. And I'll have to tell you, I believe it's going to be an uncertain year. What if the lame will walk and the blind see like when Jesus was here and they feel whole by a miracle that's been performed? Tell me, would it turn your head? And not to speak of the fire that comes from heaven, would it turn your head if you saw these kind of miracles? It might. It sure could. This is when we need to be sure that we're anchored in the Word, to the law and to the testimony. If they don't speak according to this, if there's no changed lives along with it. That's what Jesus did when he was here. He said, he performed a miracle. And then he'd say, your sins be forgiven you. These things go together. And if you don't see real conversions and those kind of things happening, and you hear untruths that are not biblical, and you see the lame walk, be very, very careful. Or the great benefactor of the humankind is out in the desert. Go out and see him. What's the Bible say about that type of thing? He's coming in the clouds. He doesn't even touch the earth, right? And the redeemed, both those who've been resurrected and those who are alive when Jesus comes, will rise to meet the Lord in the air. Know these things and have them in your heart. So when you see something, you're not going to be deceived. It's coming. Wouldn't you at least feel tempted to disbelieve God's word concerning the second coming? So, what are these 4 definitive signs that the end is near? First of all, the abomination that makes desolate. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. When that begins to happen, you'll know it. But we need to know what it is first. If we don't know what it is, we just kind of go willy-nilly, the abomination might come and go and we wouldn't even know what happened. Secondly, the gospel to all the world with power. And then the extraordinary miracles that are coming, very definitive, that we're living in the day of Jesus when he's going to come again. Wow. This is almost too much for me to comprehend. The 4th one. We've talked about 3. I believe that these miracles and these things, these definitive signs, are even beginning to emerge now. The 4th one, even now in embryo, watch for them develop. Jesus said, let's look at verses 29 and 30. Matthew 24, 29 and 30. Matthew 24, 29 and 30. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens shall be shaken. And then shall appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. Now, you know, we believe as Adventists, as we studied Adventist history, that some of these signs already have been seen. But it says here, then. I think all this is going to be repeated again. What if you see some signs in the heavens that are so extraordinary that is causing people to be very, very frightened? Let's look at something here in Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21. We read this in the class this morning. Luke chapter 21. Starting with verse 25. There shall be signs in the sun, and in the moon, and in the stars, and upon the earth distress with nations, perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear. Now we saw a little bit of that, kind of a premonition of what's going to happen when the Twin Towers came down. People thought that the end had come. But when we see these signs, celestial signs, you know, we're kind of being programmed for that a little bit. People are talking about things in the heavens right now, aren't they? They're talking about drones, they're talking about flying saucers. But when God shakes the earth and the heavens, people are going to be on their feet, and they're going to see that this is something very extraordinary. Men's hearts failing them for fear, and looking after those things which are coming upon the earth, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Watch for it. And then, the very next thing, shall they see the Son of Man coming in power and great glory. In a final, decisive, definitive sign, the heavens will shake, the earth will stagger like a drunk man, the Bible says. Talk about doomsday. Revelation 16, 15 to 21. We won't turn there in the interest of time. But that is the end of the world as we know it. No millennium of peace coming before us. If we read Jeremiah chapter 4, it says all the birds are fled. We read that this morning, didn't we? All the birds are fled. That means that there were birds there. But they're not gone. They're gone now. No men were seen, indicating there were people, but they aren't. Cities are all broken down. We're not entering a millennium of peace. When Jesus comes and takes his people home, he's going to take them to heaven. To that planet called heaven, where the New Jerusalem is sitting. And there he has prepared a home for us for 1,000 years. There's a great deception going around now that there's a millennium of peace. In fact, a book has been written that's being promulgated far and wide. That the millennium is coming. People are going to have a second chance. It's just going to be a wonderful time. Won't be that way. And I would like to just have us just look at Jeremiah 4, where it talks about this. Just kind of put this in the back of your mind. Jeremiah chapter 4. I'll wait till you find it. I want us to all see this. This is what the millennium will look like. Verse 23, I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, and they had no light. Behold the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and the hills moved. And I beheld, and lo, there was no man. Indicating that there were men at one point, but they're not anymore. And all the birds of the heaven were fled. Behold, and lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness. Was fruitful, not now. And all the cities were broken down. How many of the cities? All the cities were broken down at the presence of the Lord and his fierce anger. So when Jesus comes, the earth is going to be totally rearranged on its surface. If we turn over to chapter 25, same book, and verse 33, and it says, and the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth to the other, even to the end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered, nor buried. They shall be refuse upon the ground. This is what the earth will look like for 1,000 years. It'll be a desolate wilderness. Don't look for a millennium of peace. When the book is read, people are going to think to themselves, wow. And during the millennium, we'll have a second chance. That's not going to happen. We need to give our hearts to Jesus now. Give your heart to God in the morning. Make that your very first work. And then spend some time, some quality time every day, studying the Word for the purpose of knowing Jesus. So he's coming. That coming is going to be a glorious coming. It's going to be visible, audible, destructive, powerful, climactic, personal. Jesus wants to come for his bride. That day is at hand. As we sing the words of our closing song, oh, we see the gleams of the golden morning. When you see these things happening, beginning to happen, know that the gleams of the golden morning are here.